According to news reports and the president's own tweets, Donald Trump is going to change his domicile from New York to Florida. But can he do that? In today's video, we're going to talk about how to change your domicile from the high tax jurisdictions of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts to Florida. And we'll use President Trump's example to teach you what you need to know about moving from the high tax jurisdictions of the North to the beautiful no income tax, no estate tax land of beaches and Florida sunshine. Stay tuned. DuffLaw Digital is the YouTube channel of the Duffy Law Firm. Today we're going to talk about the president's move from New York to Florida and use his example to help you understand what you need to think about in making this move to a low tax jurisdiction like Florida. Today I'm here with my beautiful daughter, Kate.
Happy to be here.
And Kate works as an office manager here at the Duffy Law Firm, and she's been with me a number of years. And Kate, you and I have talked with a lot of clients about how to move their domicile from the northern jurisdictions, the high tax jurisdictions, to Florida. So what are some of the questions that we get from clients on how do they make their move?
Okay, Dad. So what would a basic reason that President Trump would want to move his domicile from New York to Florida?
Well, of course, we can only speculate on exactly what the motivations are in President Trump's case. But in most of our clients' cases, they want to escape the income tax, the high income tax of the northern jurisdiction for the no income tax of Florida. And another motivation might be that Florida has no estate tax, whereas New York still retains an estate tax, which is over and above the federal estate tax.
Right.
So affluent people in northern jurisdictions have been looking to Florida for some time.
Right.
There may be an additional reason now because in 2017, they passed the Tax Act, the Tax Jobs and Relief Act, and that act limits the amount of the federal deduction that residents in northern jurisdictions can take from their estate or from their federal income tax. So now they're limited to no more than $10,000 in deductions. So if you have an affluent taxpayer that might have, say, state and local taxes in New York and New York City and New York State combined could be $20,000, $30,000 or more a year, they can only deduct the first $10,000 of that. So even more than in the past few years, we've really gotten a lot of requests and inquiries about moving to Florida and changing their domicile.
Yeah, that's a big benefit. So clearly income and taxes are a really big point for all of our clients and friends here that are listening. So can Trump legally make this move to Florida?
Well, it depends. We're going to talk about exactly what the process is. But one of the first things, as you know, that clients will ask us is they'll say to a Florida lawyer, what steps do I need to take to become a Florida resident? And that may be the wrong question, because the first question we're going to need to deal with is which law applies. Does the law of New York apply in this question about moving domicile, or does the issue of Florida law apply? So that's really sort of the first threshold question.
Mm-hmm. So which law is more important?
Well, interestingly, the Supreme Court has ruled that each state can make its own law with regard to the domiciliaries in their state. So New York can have its own law and rules regarding domicile, and Florida can have its own law and rules. And in fact, all the states do have their own rules. But the general rule under common law is that once domicile is established, that domicile remains until the domicile is properly severed. So the first thing when you're talking to somebody who is already a resident of, let's say, New York, like President Trump, the first thing that his lawyers and his advisors are going to have to do is they're going to have to look at New York law and make sure that they sever his residency, his domicile in New York before they can justify to the auditors in New York, to their satisfaction, that they are establishing a new domicile in Florida.
Mm-hmm. So, Dad, what does President Trump need to do to become a Florida resident?
There's actually two different tests that are undertaken by the New York Department of Taxation. So let me take the statutory test first, even though the auditors may apply the domiciliary test first. The statutory test is very simple, and this is the one that most of our clients know when they come into our office because they've heard it from other friends around the golf course or the bridge table or whatever. The statutory test is a simple two-part test. Does the person claiming to no longer be a resident of New York, does that person maintain a permanent place of abode in New York? And did that person live or reside or visit the state of New York for 183 days or more? So 183 days and a permanent place of abode. That's pretty simple and straightforward, pretty black and white. So all the clients have to do is, are they going to keep a property in New York? And a lot of our clients say, yeah, we still want to maintain a property in New York. President Trump has had that penthouse in the Fifth Avenue Tower, New York Trump Tower, for many years. There may be a lot of reasons why he wants to keep that, even though possibly, legitimately, he wants to become a Florida resident. And he should be able to keep that property. But he needs to understand that if he does keep that residence in New York and he spends any more than 183 days in New York, he's going to continue to be a New York resident under the statutory test.
That sounds like it's, a key point in deciding if someone is going to be able to become a Florida resident.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of clients will tell me too that there may be various different reasons and their circumstances. Maybe they have a beautiful home and perhaps the market's not favorable to a sale, or if they were to sell their home and they wanted to visit New York, it would make it difficult for them or expensive for them to make those arrangements. So there's a lot of reasons why they want to do that. The key here is under the statutory test is if you want to beat the statutory test, make sure that you're nowhere near 183 days. Don't try to get cute and don't try to get close, because the auditors in New York have subpoena power and they can review cell phone records, they can review your Easy Pass to see if your car is going through the Holland Tunnel or wherever it's going in the state of New York. They can review credit card statements. So they know pretty much if you're in the state of New York.
They've been dealing with this for years, so
exactly.
They know all the tricks going on. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the statutory test. Two-part, very simple, permanent place of abode and 183 days.
Okay. What's the other test?
Okay, so the statutory test, let's put that aside for a second. Let's say you're able to overcome the presumptions of the statutory test. The second test is the domiciliary test, and this is more nuanced than the statutory test. And this is the one that catches a lot of clients because it's not so black and white, and it's a little bit more challenging for a lot of our clients to defeat. But the first part, there's 5 parts to the domiciliary test. And the first part is the residence. So when you think about it, it can be very subjective. Remember, domicile, according to common law and in many of the case laws of the different states around the country, is where the person intends to be their permanent residence. So that's kind of subjective. And it's hard for a client to prove that. And one point, it's the burden of proof is on the taxpayer. So unlike a criminal consideration where the burden of proof is on the state, here our clients are going to have to prove by clear and convincing evidence that they are no longer a resident of New York. So President Trump and Melania are going to have to prove that if the auditors call it into question. So they're going to have to look at some different criteria. And the New York courts have decided many years ago that the simple filing of paperwork is not necessarily dispositive, which means although President Trump filed a statement declaring his domicile to be in Palm Beach County, I think he did that in September, October of this year, but notwithstanding the fact that he filed that paperwork saying that his domicile is in Florida, that's not enough for the New York auditors. So one of the things that they're going to look at is residence. And when you think about it, it's sort of a common sense analysis. For instance, most people who have more than one residence, their primary residence is more valuable it's more prestigious because that's their permanent place of abode. It's like years ago, people used to get houses down the Jersey Shore, or a lot of our Florida residents will get a small place up in, say, North Carolina or something to avoid the heat in the summer, or they might have a little cabin in the mountains of New Hampshire or wherever. Typically, their main home is much more expensive and
Right.
valuable than their vacation home. So they're going to compare the two homes as a starting point, residence.
Right. So that's first.
Yeah, and in President Trump's case, it may be sort of a toss-up.
Yeah.
Because he has Mar-a-Lago, which is a beautiful and very valuable residence in Palm Beach, but he also has his penthouse on Fifth Avenue in the Trump Tower, and I'm not sure which value exceeds the other, but I would say it probably would be
Likely
pretty
they're
close.
close. Yeah.
So the first threshold point of residency may be a toss-up in President Trump's case.
What would the second issue he may run into?
Well, the second one is basically business activity. So again, here the auditors are, they understand that the taxpayer is saying they're no longer a resident of New York, like President Trump, but for obvious reasons, the taxpayer may want to avoid paying the substantial taxes, the combined rate of New York State and New York City, which is, I think, probably 13% or somewhere in that neighborhood. They're trying to avoid paying that tax. So clearly it's in the taxpayer's own interest to say that they're not residents. So the auditors are looking for something, objective. And so one of the things they look at is business. And they say, do you still maintain active business within the state of New York or the city of New York?
In that case, he would.
Well, actually, President Trump turned over the day-to-day operations, according to press reports, of his development business to a trust and placed two of his adult sons and a third trusted advisor as trustees of that multi-billion-dollar business while he's president of the United States. So if that's the case, and that's what the press reports indicate, he might win on the business analysis.
And the next one?
The next is time. And this can be very tricky because, again, a lot of our clients understand the 183-day rule because that's very black and white. 365 days of the year, if you spend 183 or more days in New York, you're still a New Yorker. They understand that 183-day rule. But here, when you're looking at time on the domiciliary factor, it's more a question of presumably you're not at 183 or they would catch you under the statutory test. So, but here they're saying, where do you spend the majority of your time? So the factual question for President Trump would be, where is he spending the majority of his time? And can he establish that he's spending the majority of his time in Florida?
Which might be a little difficult, right? He's always traveling and
he's based out of Washington, D.C.
Yeah, so
I think this might be a difficult question. So one of my good friends and colleagues and former partners, Mark Klein, Mark, he's a wonderful guy and really expert on residency with Hodgson Russ. I've been doing it for many years. Mark was quoted in the New York Times recently saying that he believes that perhaps President Trump didn't quite stick the landing, meaning not only do you have to depart from New York, but you have to establish the fact that you've established your residency somewhere else, like Florida.
Right.
And what Mark is pointing out is it may be kind of close. According to press reports, President Trump spent approximately 90 days in New York last year, and he spent approximately 90 days in Florida. So it's kind of close, and he spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. and traveling around. So like Mark Klein says, I'm not sure he stuck the landing on the time.
Might be hard to prove, yeah.
Yeah, it might go either way. So the important thing for our clients to understand is there's 5 factors. You're going to have to prevail on 3 of the 5 factors. So if President Trump has, let's say, a toss-up on the residence question, let's say he may be able to establish the no longer active business presence in New York, and then a toss-up on the time factor. He's got 2 out of 3 of those are toss-ups. Right now, it's kind of iffy on whether or not he can actually establish, the facts satisfactorily to the New York auditors and under
Right.
New York law that he's established himself as a Florida resident.
Okay. So, Dad, we've covered now 3 out of 5. And the first one is they compare residency, right? And then
Well, the residences.
the residences.
Yeah.
And 2, business activity. And 3 is time, where they spend their time. So what is 4?
Okay, so remember, we're on domiciliary test, and there's 5 components. The 4th component is sometimes referred to as near and dear, or sometimes referred to as the teddy bear rule. Now, again, sometimes when we explain this to clients, they get a little, crazy because they think it's unfair. But as the Supreme Court says, New York can set their own criteria. And of course, the tax jurisdictions, whether it's New York, Massachusetts, or Pennsylvania, New Jersey, they're sort of in a difficult bind. They're trying to quantify, what exactly would show in a real way that somebody has moved their domicile. And so they came up with this concept of near and dear. And when you think about it, I think it sort of makes sense. So where do we keep the items that are important to us? And we call it the teddy bear rule, obviously like a child. But, for example, one of the things they'll look at is they'll say, does the taxpayer have a boat? Mm-hmm. A lot of our clients, especially the ones that are more affluent, they have a boat. Where is the boat? Is the boat harbored in the New York area, or is it down in Florida? Jewelry or collections. I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago, we had a wonderful couple that was moving their domicile from New York to Florida. They had a beautiful home on Long Island, a very large, expensive home on Long Island. And the husband collected antique cars. Mm-hmm. Remember?
Yeah.
And he had I think 4 or 5 antique cars, and they had a 6-car garage on their property in Long Island, and it was climate controlled. And it was very important to him that these automobiles be maintained in a pristine condition. And he told me when I talked to him about the near and dear, because this would be a near and dear, this would be a collection.
That's a big one, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, where are those cars? Are they still in Long Island or are they in Florida? Well, they had a beautiful home on the island in Palm Beach, but they didn't have a 6-car garage in Palm Beach. Mm-hmm. And they didn't have a climate controlled garage. He even told me it was difficult to find a commercial climate controlled garage in Florida. But what I explained to him is, if you want to win on the near and dear factor and you have something important like that, it would be very helpful to have those cars stored in Florida as opposed to the home on Long Island. Mm-hmm. So he addressed that situation, but every client has their own, thing that they have to deal with. It could be anything. It could be artwork. We've had some clients with some wonderful art collections, and they've told us that their property in New York is more suited to having the art there, and their property in Florida, although of significant value on the water, say on the intercoastal, is got a more, sort of beachy, casual, ambiance, and they prefer not to have their expensive art moved from New York to Florida. But here's the problem. If you're in a situation like President Trump, you've got to have this factor. You've got to really look at what can you do to win the argument with the New York auditors.
Mm-hmm. What do you advise your clients usually do?
Well, for example, on this example with President Trump, he's got a big, expensive Lear jet. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that is probably, on a normal basis, that would probably be the main place where that would be maintained would be in New York or New Jersey, making it easy for President Trump to fly in and out of New York. Have that hangared in West Palm Beach. Mm-hmm. And one of the things clients will ask us is, well, how are the auditors going to know? Think about insurance. If you're insuring a multi-million-dollar Lear jet, one of the questions that the insurance company may want to know is, where is its main location? Mm-hmm. And that might be on an insurance record, which would be subject to the auditors.
Yeah, and that would win you that one.
That would help.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be like, again, with President Trump, it'd be a tough question because I imagine he probably has significant art, both in New York and in Mar-a-Lago. Mm-hmm. But, what we're going to try and do if we're advising someone like President Trump is to take a look at all the factors and do everything you can to satisfy these different factors in your favor.
Right. So now for the last factor.
So the 5th factor, I think you may know because you've been with me and discussed it with some of the clients. this drives people crazy, and we understand it. And I think everyone that deals in this area, another friend of ours, Barry Horowitz, is a wonderful CPA with Witham, and in New York. And Barry was quoted recently in the New York Times as well on this issue about President Trump's move, and he was talking about the fact that 100% or nearly 100% of his affluent clients that have departed New York as domiciliaries have been audited by the New York Department of Taxation. So,
Wow.
they go after, and they have found over the years, they've found millions and millions, and from what I've read in reports, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue for the state of New York by defeating taxpayers who are trying to exit New York. So the fifth and final factor on the domiciliary test is family. And this is a very tough one for a lot of clients, because where their adult children live is not necessarily within
No,
the
it could
purview
be
of the
anywhere.
client.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
You don't have control over it most of the time.
Exactly. And if your adult children have been born and raised in New York, like President Trump's children have been, and they have, social connections, they've got business connections, and now his two adult sons are running the Trump development, which is basically based in New York. What are you going to do about that?
Right.
Nothing. You can't do anything about that. So you may sort of have to give this one away. Even the auditors in reports that I've seen from New York have said that they find it a little bit distasteful to go to this factor.
Right.
But if there's a toss-up on the other four factors, they will look at family.
Wow.
So if you tell me as a client that you can't do anything about that, then my answer to you is, then we need to focus like a laser on the first four elements, and we've got to win at least 3 out of 4 of those.
Right.
Really win them, so they're not toss-ups, in order to win the audit on that situation. So we hope you enjoyed our video today on the question of whether or not President Trump can relocate his domicile from New York to Florida. And this is part of our series that we call Lawyers and Law in the News. And we use current events to illustrate some examples on Florida law that are helpful to our clients. And certainly changing domicile is an important part of our
Huge
practice.
question we get all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's important for a lot of our friends and clients that are moving from New York and Massachusetts and New Jersey down to Florida. So we hope that this was helpful for you. We hope that you like it. Please look for other videos. We did one recently on impeachment. We don't take sides. We simply talk about the law. And on that impeachment video, we talk about what exactly is meant by high crimes and misdemeanors under the Constitution. And we think, hopefully, you'll find that of some interest. And that's our series that we try to help you think like a lawyer. We also do videos on our areas of the law, especially probate and trust litigation, probate and trust administration, estate planning, and Florida residential real estate.
Thanks for having me, Dad.
It was great having you, Kate. I look forward to having you again. And stay tuned. Please subscribe and give us a thumbs up and leave us a comment. Let us know what you'd like to see on DuffLaw Digital. Remember, you can find us also on Facebook, Duffy Law Firm on Facebook. We also have postings that we put on LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter. So DuffLaw Digital is the digital platform for the Duffy Law Firm. I'm Florida lawyer Brian Duffy, my daughter Kate, and thanks very much for joining us.
Stay tuned.
See you soon. Camera, set my...
You're going to have to set it for a timer.
No, I have my...
Oh, you have your clicker? Perfect.